The galaxy had always been a vast, ever-expanding entity, teeming with strange worlds and ancient civilizations, some benevolent, others far less so. But within this grand theater of existence, few had ever expected the human race to make such an impact. It wasn't that they were superior in technology, or that their alliances were particularly prestigious. It was because humans had a quality no one else in the galaxy seemed to possess, an unshakable resolve to fight for what they believed was right. On the outskirts of the Milky Way, near the fading remnants of a once thriving intergalactic trading route, a small, dilapidated spacecraft coasted silently through the void. Its name, Reluctance, was a fitting testament to the crew aboard, all of whom were a mixture of ex-soldiers, scientists, and adventurers, people who had long since put aside the burdens of heroism. They had seen too much, lost too much. Most of them had hoped to never again be pulled into the chaos of galactic conflicts. Captain Elias Drayden leaned back in his worn pilot seat, his fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the console. His once sharp eyes were now dulled by years of grief and guilt, and his face had a hollow quality as though his soul had been permanently eroded by the endless, painful experiences of war. It had been 5 years since the fall of the Androsian Alliance, a bloody campaign that left him with little to his name except the haunting memories of fallen comrades and a reputation as a soldier too cynical for peace. You ever think about just shutting everything down and coasting? Commander Lila Ran, his first officer, asked, her voice breaking the silence. She, too, had known war all too intimately. Her people, the Corran, were known for their tactical brilliance and ruthless efficiency. Once, they had been feared across the galaxy. Now, they were slowly fading into irrelevance. Elias' lips curled into a faint smile, a wisp of bitterness in the gesture. If we shut down, we might as well just turn ourselves over to the Vordax. The Vordax were a malevolent race of technologically advanced conquerors who had been terrorizing the galaxy for centuries, and the last thing any of them wanted was to fall into their hands. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden beep on the communication panel. Elias looked over to the screen, where a holographic transmission began to form. It was an unexpected communication from an unknown source, a faint, flickering signal that seemed to be struggling to stabilize. The figure that appeared was a young woman, her appearance a blur of static at first, but slowly coming into focus. She was an unfamiliar face, dressed in a uniform that resembled the old Galactic Republic's, though her insignia was newer, and of a faction no one had heard of before. Behind her was a star chart, showing an area of space that appeared to be just outside the galactic core. The strange coordinates seemed to hum with an eerie, ominous energy. Captain Drayden, the woman's voice crackled, as though she were struggling against some unseen force. I need your help. The galaxy, no, the entire universe, depends on it. Elias stiffened in his seat. Lila moved closer, her brow furrowing. Both knew well enough that every call for help came with a price, and they had already paid enough in blood to last a lifetime. What's this about? Elias asked, leaning forward with a steady but wary tone. The woman hesitated for a moment before continuing. A force unlike any we've encountered is rising, one that threatens to unmake the fabric of the universe itself. They call themselves the Void-Born. Their leader, Emperor Zareth, is gathering an army of alien races, each more deadly than the last. If we don't act soon, all life in this galaxy will fall under their shadow. Elias exchanged a glance with Lila, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held a flicker of doubt. The Void-Born? Elias scoffed. I've heard that name before, but it was just a rumor, a myth, a bedtime story. Are you telling me that we're supposed to fight a bunch of ghosts? He laughed darkly, shaking his head. Not interested. But the woman didn't flinch. I understand your hesitation, Captain, but the Void-Born are real, and they are already moving. Time is running out. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of the situation sinking in. Elias had already seen enough war to know when a threat was real. And yet, the call for help felt off. It didn't sit right with him. The woman before him wasn't just desperate, she was terrified. You don't understand, Captain. the Voidborn were responsible for the fall of the Androsian Alliance. They didn't just conquer, they erased them, she whispered, her voice barely audible now. I am the last of my people, and if you don't help me, you will be the last of yours. The message flickered one last time, before the transmission abruptly cut out, leaving only the eerie hum of static in its wake. Elias stared at the empty screen, his heart pounding, the gravity of the words sinking in. His instincts screamed to walk away, to let the galaxy burn if it meant keeping his crew out of danger. But something deep inside him, something he thought had long since died, began to stir. Perhaps they weren't done fighting after all. Prepare the ship, he said quietly, his voice resolute. Looks like we're going to need to make a stop. The reluctance roared back to life as the engines hummed to full power. The galaxy had one more reluctant hero, whether it was ready for him or not. As the reluctance hurtled through the cosmos, the crew felt a sense of trepidation that none of them had experienced in years. The coordinates they had received led them to an uncharted sector, nestled between two dark nebulae where the light of distant stars barely filtered through the thick clouds of gas and dust. This place was silent, unnervingly silent, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Captain Elias Drayton stood at the bridge, staring at the stars through the viewport. His fingers were drumming softly on the edge of his console as his mind raced. The mention of the Androsian Alliance's fall was no trivial matter. He had been there, a part of that dark chapter, and it had taken everything he had to survive it. The memory still haunted him, and the idea that the same enemy, if it could even be called that, was rising again unsettled him more than he cared to admit. I still don't like this, Commander Lila Rand muttered from behind him, her voice tight with a mix of skepticism and concern. She was standing beside the tactical station, running scans of the surrounding space, her fingers dancing across the controls. You think I do? Elias replied without turning, his tone sharp but with an edge of weariness. But we don't have much of a choice now. The transmission was clear, those Voidborn, they wiped out the Androsians. If we don't find out what's happening, we'll all end up like them. Lila's eyes flicked toward the flickering star map on her console. You think that woman was telling the truth? She said they erased an entire civilization. That's a big claim. More than a claim, Elias muttered, remembering the cold fear in the woman's voice. It's a warning. Suddenly, the ship's sensors emitted a high-pitched warning, snapping Elias' attention back to the task at hand. He strode over to Lila's station, and she quickly manipulated the controls, bringing up a visual on the main screen. In the center of the view, just beyond the nebula, a dark shape emerged, vast and sprawling, its silhouette shifting as though it were a living entity. That can't be a natural formation, Elias said, his voice laced with disbelief. The object before them was a massive ship, too large and ominous to be anything from this galaxy. Its surface was black, absorbing all light around it, and the strange pulsing energy emanating from it made the air in the bridge grow heavy. What is that? Lila asked, her tone quieter now, and for the first time in a long time, Elias could feel her unease. That, Elias replied, swallowing hard, is the enemy. The ship was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Its form was jagged, angular, with tendrils of dark energy snaking out from its hull, crackling with an unholy power. It had the unmistakable aura of something ancient, something that had been dormant for far too long. The Voidborn had arrived. Shields up, Elias barked, and Lila immediately began activating the defensive systems. Prepare to engage. Engage? With what? Lila asked, her fingers flying across the console in a desperate attempt to analyze the unknown vessel. This thing's shields are off the charts. We don't even know what kind of weapons it has. We won't know until we try, Elias shot back, his jaw clenched. The reluctance lurched as the massive ship drew closer, its hull shimmering with an ethereal light. A voice, deep and resonating, boomed through the ship's communications system, far too clear for comfort. You are in the presence of the Voidborn, humans. Surrender now, and your existence may be spared. The voice was hollow, cold, and echoed with a deep sense of malice, as if it had traveled through the very fabric of space itself. Elias clenched his fists. Ignore the message. Brace for impact. Before anyone could respond, the entire ship shook violently as a burst of dark energy collided with their hull. The Reluctance veered to the side, alarms blaring as the ship's outer systems were knocked offline. Crew members scrambled to keep their balance as the walls trembled. Damage report. Elias shouted. Shields are holding at 50%, Lila reported, her voice strained. But there's a breach in the starboard wing. We've lost external communication. Elias' mind raced as he tried to assess the situation. The ship was not equipped to fight such an advanced enemy, yet here they were, facing something that should not exist. He wasn't foolish enough to believe that a direct confrontation would lead to victory. No, they needed to learn about the Voidborn. They needed to understand what they were up against, and quickly. He turned to Lila. Get us out of here. Full speed ahead. We need to find somewhere safe to regroup. As the Reluctance accelerated, veering away from the dark ship, Elias couldn't shake the sense of inevitability that clung to him. The Voidborn had made their move, and this would be the beginning of something much larger than anyone on the ship had prepared for. And yet, in the back of his mind, a thought gnawed at him. Something about the woman's transmission felt wrong, like a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. His crew, his reluctant heroes, would have to make a choice soon. Fight or run. And there was no guarantee that running would even be an option. The Reluctance sped through the void, the ship's engines straining under the pressure as Elias guided them through the shattered remnants of the star system. Behind them, the Voidborn vessel loomed like a phantom, its dark energy trailing after them like a shadow, never quite disappearing. The crew was still recovering from the sudden assault, but their resolve was beginning to harden. The message had been clear, the Voidborn weren't just an idle threat. They were real. And they were coming for everyone. Elias stood at the helm, his hands gripping the console with white knuckles. His mind was still reeling from the terrifying confrontation, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him like a crushing force. He glanced at Lila, who was working furiously at the tactical station, her brows furrowed in concentration. How much longer until we're out of range? Elias asked, though the question had a hollow edge to it. The truth was, he wasn't sure if out of range would even matter. The Voidborn were unlike any enemy he had ever faced. Lila's fingers danced across the console. We're still in the outer edge of the system. It'll take a few hours to put enough distance between us and them to even think about regrouping. But they're not following directly, yet. Yet, Elias repeated grimly. They're patient. They'll wait. We need to find a place to hide, somewhere they won't expect us. As they navigated through the dense asteroid field surrounding a dying star, Lila shot him a glance. You sure about that? Hiding won't stop them. If they have the power to wipe out the Androsians, they'll find us. We don't have the firepower to fight them, Lila, Elias said, his voice harsh. Not yet. We need information. We need allies. We're not taking them on until we know what we're dealing with. Yeah, and what happens when they catch up? Lila pressed, her tone laced with doubt. They won't, Elias replied, almost to himself. We'll find a way. Suddenly, the communications panel beeped again, an incoming transmission blinking on the screen. Elias froze, his instincts going on high alert. The last time they had received an unexpected message, it had been from the woman, the one who had sent them on this suicidal mission. He turned to Lila, his expression hardening. Should we answer? Lila asked, but her voice had the unmistakable sound of someone who was no longer sure they could trust anyone, let alone an unknown ally. Put it through, Elias ordered. The screen flickered to life, but this time, it wasn't the same woman who had contacted them before. Instead, the face that appeared was older, weathered by time and experience. His short-cropped hair was a silvery gray, and his uniform bore the insignia of the Androsian Alliance, though it was stained with wear and tear. His eyes were sharp and piercing, carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. You're not alone, the man said, his voice gravelly, but steady. I've been tracking the Voidborn for years. My name is General Ilos, former commander of the Androsian fleet. I've heard the rumors about your ship, Captain Drayden. You've tangled with them before, haven't you? Elias' heart skipped a beat. The Androsian fleet, the same fleet he had watched crumble in the wake of the Voidborn's attack years ago. He had thought they were all gone. He had thought he was one of the last of their kind. Yes, I've tangled with them, Elias said carefully. But I don't know how you survived. The Voidborn, they erased your people. The general's expression darkened, his lips pressing into a thin line. Not quite. Some of us survived. We're scattered, but we've been regrouping in secret. The Androsians may have fallen, but we still have resources, allies. And more importantly, we still have information. Why are you contacting us now? Lila asked, her suspicion clear. We've got a massive target on our backs. What makes you think we're willing to trust you? General Ilos let out a long sigh. Because, Captain, you're the only ones who can help. We've been tracking the Voidborn for years, but they've been moving too fast, too quietly. Their plans are vast, and they are close to completing whatever it is they've been working toward. If they succeed, the galaxy will fall. It's not just the Androsians that will be erased, no one will be spared. Elias exchanged a look with Lila. Every instinct told him to be cautious. The man in front of him claimed to be a survivor, but there was too much at stake to trust blindly. And yet, if there was even a chance that the Voidborn's plans could be thwarted, they couldn't afford to ignore it. What do you need from us? Elias asked, his voice tight. We need to gather the remnants of the Androsian fleet, General Ilos said, leaning forward slightly. I've been assembling a coalition, small, but growing. If we can make a stand, we can stop the Voidborn. But I can't do it alone. I've heard about your crew, Captain. I've heard about the reluctance. I know you have experience, and you have something the Voidborn fear, courage. Something they don't understand. Elias paused, his mind racing. Courage. It was a dangerous word. The galaxy had tested his courage until it had been stretched beyond reason. And yet, the weight of his past, of the comrades he had lost, pulled at him. The choice seemed clear: stand by and watch as the universe burned, or take action and risk everything. I'll do it, Elias said finally, his voice resolute. We'll help you. But you'd better have a plan. Because if we're going to stand against the Voidborn, we're going to need more than just courage. General Ilos smiled grimly. We have a plan. But we're going to need more than just a few ships to pull it off. We need every ally we can find. And so, as the Reluctance sailed deeper into the unknown, Elias knew that they were on the precipice of something far larger than any of them had expected. The Voidborn were coming, and the reluctant heroes of the Milky Way had just been thrust into the heart of a war that would determine the fate of everything. The Reluctance dropped out of warp speed, the ship's hull groaning as it slowed to a cautious pace. Ahead, a series of asteroid clusters hung in the dark void, their jagged surfaces illuminated only by the dim glow of distant stars. It was here, among the ancient rocks and forgotten remnants of the galaxy's past, that General Ilos had directed them to meet. As Elias stood in the bridge, staring out at the desolate expanse, he couldn't shake the growing weight in his chest. The galaxy was on the edge of something catastrophic, and their small, ragtag crew had just become part of something much larger than they had ever imagined. This was no longer just about survival. This was about stopping a force that threatened to annihilate everything they knew. Coordinates locked, Lila said, her voice steady but taut with the same tension that had gripped them all since the Voidborn's first attack. General Ilos is waiting for us on an old Androsian command ship. Elias nodded, his hands resting on the console as he surveyed the vast emptiness around them. I don't like it, he muttered. It feels too quiet. Lila's eyes narrowed. You think they're already here? Could be. Could be they're just waiting for the right moment to strike, Elias replied, though a part of him hoped he was wrong. The Voidborn were nothing if not methodical, and the longer they remained undetected, the greater the danger. They couldn't afford to wait for another surprise attack. They needed answers, and they needed them now. With a low rumble, the Reluctance slid into the heart of the asteroid field. The ship's sensors began to ping as they maneuvered through the debris, and the familiar contours of the old Androsian command ship came into view. The ship was a hulking relic of an older age, its dark metal surface battered by the passage of time. But even in its dilapidated state, there was no mistaking the pride that once belonged to the Androsian fleet. This was a warship built for command, and it had stood at the forefront of countless battles. The comms crackled to life as they approached, and General Ilos's voice came through, gruff but commanding. "You're late, Captain. But I'm glad to see you made it." "Barely," Elias replied, his tone tinged with dry humor, though it didn't mask the tension in his voice. "We've had a few run-ins with the Voidborn already." Ilos's voice softened, a hint of understanding in it. "I heard. They've been moving faster than we thought, pushing their plans ahead before we could even track them. That's why I need you here, Captain. Your crew, your experience, could be the key to winning this fight." Elias remained silent for a moment. The general's words held weight, but there was something else there, an undercurrent of desperation. The galaxy had already lost so much to the Voidborn, and yet Ilos was still clinging to hope. Elias wasn't sure whether that was a strength or a weakness. "All right, we're coming in," Elias said, breaking the silence. "Don't get too comfortable." The Reluctance docked with the Androsian command ship, and the crew filed into the airlock, weapons holstered but ready. The corridor beyond the hatch was dark, lit only by flickering overhead lights. The atmosphere was stale, as if the ship had been abandoned for years. The faint scent of old machinery and dust hung in the air. As they walked deeper into the ship's belly, they were greeted by the sight of General Ilos, his tall frame imposing even in the dim light. His uniform, though battle-worn, still carried the insignia of the Androsian Alliance. Beside him stood a small group of soldiers, all wearing the same grim expressions. They, too, looked battle-hardened, their eyes betraying the toll of years spent on the run. "Captain Drayden," Ilos said, offering a firm handshake. "It's good to finally meet you in person." "Likewise," Elias replied, but his tone held a trace of caution. "What's the situation?" "Worse than we thought," Ilos said, leading them toward a large briefing room at the heart of the ship. "The Voidborn aren't just a threat to us. They've already started infiltrating other systems, gaining allies by force or coercion. Some of the races they've subjugated have joined their ranks, swelling their numbers. We're on the brink of a full-scale galactic war." "Great," Lila muttered under her breath, but Elias shot her a look to silence her. It wasn't time for sarcasm. They entered the briefing room, where a holographic display flickered to life, showing a map of the galaxy. A series of red dots began to appear, each representing a system that had either fallen under the Voidborn's influence or was in danger of doing so. The red light spread out like tendrils, reaching further into the galaxy with each passing day. Elias studied the map carefully. There were areas that had already been hit, worlds he had once known, and others that were unfamiliar to him. The Voidborn were moving faster than they could respond, and the situation was growing increasingly dire. "General, how many forces do we have?" Elias asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the sinking feeling in his gut. Ilos didn't hesitate. "A few dozen ships, scattered and outgunned, but we've got something the Voidborn don't have: time. We can't stop them with sheer firepower. We need to strike strategically, disrupt their supply lines, and slow them down," Elias finished, his mind already racing with possibilities. "I know. We'll need intelligence, information on their movements, weaknesses." "That's where you come in," Ilos said, turning toward Elias. "I've heard rumors of a place, an ancient station, hidden deep within the galaxy. It was once an Androsian stronghold. If we can get there, we might find what we need to turn the tide." "A secret base?" Lila raised an eyebrow. "Where is this place?" Ilos's finger traced a path on the map, pointing to a remote sector far beyond the reach of current alliances. It's buried in the heart of a dead star system. It's been abandoned for centuries, but it holds information that could change the course of this war. Elias nodded. This was it. Their first real lead. But the sector was dangerously close to Voidborn-controlled space, and even finding the station would be a challenge. If we're going to survive this, we'll need to be faster, smarter, and more determined than the Voidborn, Elias said, his voice steady but resolute. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for everything. And as the room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of that truth settled on all of them. The storm was coming. And the reluctant heroes of the Milky Way had just become part of the fight for the galaxy's future. The Reluctance cut through the black expanse of space, its engines humming softly as it left behind the Androsian command ship and the uneasy alliance forged between them. Elias stood on the bridge, his eyes focused on the shimmering holographic map spread out before him. The sector they were heading toward, an abandoned star system buried deep in uncharted space, was a ghostly graveyard of celestial bodies. It had once been a flourishing part of the Androsian Empire, but now, it was nothing more than a forgotten relic. The perfect place to hide a secret base, and a perfect place for the Voidborn to target if they found out about it. Everyone's ready, Captain, Lila said, her voice cutting through the silence of the bridge. Her face was as impassive as ever, but Elias could see the same tension in her eyes. They all knew the risk of their mission. There was no turning back now. Elias gave a brief nod, his eyes never leaving the star map. We're heading into the heart of enemy territory. The Voidborn know we're looking for something. It's only a matter of time before they come after us. We've been running from them for weeks, Lila muttered. What's the plan? Run again? There's no more running, Elias said, his voice low but firm. We fight or we die. But we need that base, and we need what's inside it. That's our only chance. The tension in the room was palpable. They had all known this was coming, the moment when escape wasn't an option. It was time to face their fears and fight back. We'll arrive in the sector in a few hours, Lila continued. We'll need to get past the perimeter of Voidborn-controlled space before they notice us. Keep the shields at full power and the cloaking systems primed, Elias ordered. We can't afford to be spotted before we reach the base. If we do, we'll have no way to escape. The crew nodded in unison, and Elias felt a strange sense of pride swell in his chest. They were a team, imperfect, reluctant, but united by a shared goal. He had seen them all at their lowest points, but this mission had brought out something in each of them. Something fierce. But even as the Reluctance neared its destination, the looming presence of the Voidborn hung like a dark cloud over them. It was one thing to fight an enemy you could see, to know where they were and how to strike back. But the Voidborn were different. They were elusive, unpredictable, and they didn't fight like any enemy Elias had ever known. Suddenly, the comms crackled to life, and General Ilos's voice rang out, harsh and urgent. Captain Drayden, this is General Ilos. We've detected a large Voidborn fleet moving toward your position. They know you're coming. Elias's blood ran cold. They had been compromised. How far out? He asked, his mind working quickly to formulate a plan. They'll be in range in 2 hours, Ilos replied. They're moving fast. If you don't make it to the station now, they'll catch up to you. We're almost there, Elias said, turning to Lila. Get us there faster. Do whatever you have to do. Lila's fingers flew across the console, adjusting the ship's trajectory and pushing the Reluctance to its limits. Hold on tight, she said, her voice taut with concentration. The ship surged forward, its engines roaring as it streaked through the stars. Elias could feel the pressure of time pressing against them, each second bringing them closer to the void-born fleet and further from their goal. In the meantime, the crew was preparing for what lay ahead. Lila and the rest of the tactical crew were monitoring the void-born fleet's movements, while the rest of the team gathered weapons and checked their gear. There was no telling what they would face once they arrived at the station, but they knew they had to be ready for anything. As the Reluctance neared the dark star system, the mood on the bridge grew even more intense. Elias stood at the helm, his hands resting on the controls. He could feel the weight of the universe on his shoulders, the pressure of leading this crew, of protecting them, and of facing an enemy that seemed unstoppable. And yet, in the midst of that pressure, a spark of determination flared in his chest. He had fought too many battles to back down now. The Voidborn had pushed them to the edge, but they were not the only ones capable of fighting. He glanced at his crew, the reluctant heroes who had followed him this far. Lila, cold and calculating, yet fiercely loyal. John, the ship's engineer, who had transformed from a nervous wreck into one of their most reliable assets. And then there was Kira, the communications officer, who had once been a prisoner of the Voidborn and now held a personal vendetta against them. They were all different, but they were all united. They had survived this long, and they would survive the next challenge, whatever it was. Approaching the station, Lila called out, her voice sharp. No signs of Voidborn ships on the immediate sensors. We're clear for now. Elias nodded, but he knew better than to relax. The danger was far from over. The Reluctance passed through the system's dense asteroid field, weaving between massive rocks and crumbling moons. At the center of the field, shrouded by the debris, the station appeared, dark, silent, and waiting. Its once imposing exterior had been stripped of all but its skeletal structure, but it was still there, a remnant of the Androsian Empire. And inside, the secrets they needed to turn the tide of the war might be waiting. Get us inside, Elias ordered, his voice resolute. As they moved closer to the station's docking bay, the shadows seemed to stretch longer, as if the station itself was holding its breath. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. But as the Reluctance neared the station's entrance, an eerie, almost unnatural stillness filled the air. Something felt wrong. Kira's voice cut through the tension. Captain, I'm getting strange readings. Something's off about the station. Elias stiffened. What do you mean? I'm not sure, Kira said, her voice laced with uncertainty. It's like a signal, but it's distorted, corrupted. It's almost like someone's trying to mask their presence. Stay sharp, Elias ordered. Lila, get us docked. Everyone else, prepare for anything. The crew braced themselves as the Reluctance docked with the station's airlock. The door opened with a soft hiss, and the darkness beyond stretched out before them like an uncharted abyss. With a final glance at his crew, Elias stepped forward. They had come this far. Whatever lay inside, they would face it together. The Reluctance's airlock door hissed open, revealing the darkness within the abandoned station. The eerie silence pressed in on them, as if the very air in the station had been frozen in time. Nothing moved. No lights flickered. It was as though the place had been completely deserted for centuries, or worse, it had been waiting for them. Elias led the way down the narrow, dimly lit hallway. His boots echoed softly against the metal floor, and the rest of the crew followed in tense silence, weapons at the ready. Lila was at his side, her sharp eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. They were not alone here. Elias could feel it. "Keep your comms open," he murmured, his voice low but steady. "We don't know what we're walking into." "I've got your 6, Lila replied, her voice terse as she checked the map on her console. "There's a central hub not far from here. We should head there." The walls of the station were cold to the touch, their surface covered in layers of grime and dust, evidence of years, maybe even centuries of abandonment. The silence, once unsettling, was now suffocating. Every step felt like they were intruding on something ancient and forbidden. "We'll split up when we get to the hub," Elias decided. "I want teams of 2. Lila, you and Kira take the left wing. John and I will go right. Check everything. Data terminals, consoles, anything we can use." Lila nodded, her hand resting on the hilt of her sidearm. She knew the stakes. If they didn't find the information they needed here, there would be no turning back. The Voidborn would come, and the galaxy would fall into darkness. They pressed on. The hallway led them into an open chamber, the center of the station's main hub. A giant circular platform hovered in the center, surrounded by consoles and outdated equipment. The entire room was a relic, untouched by the hands of time but weighed down by the years of neglect. The lights were dim, almost flickering, but the faint hum of the station's core still pulsed beneath their feet, like the beating heart of a dying giant. "Stay close," Elias said, his voice low as they spread out, moving toward the console at the far side of the room. The rest of the crew followed suit, all of them alert, watching the shadows that seemed to dance just beyond their reach. John reached the nearest terminal and began to work quickly, his fingers flying over the keys as he tried to bypass the station's security protocols. Elias couldn't help but feel a twinge of nervousness. He trusted John with his life, but this station was old, its systems unpredictable. If anything went wrong, they could be locked inside, or worse, trigger a security alert that would bring the Voidborn down on them. "Got it," John's voice broke the tension as the terminal hummed to life. He punched in a series of commands, the screen flickering before showing a map of the station's layout. "This place is massive. Looks like there's more below ground. Deeper than we thought." Elias moved to his side, his eyes scanning the data on the screen. "Let's see what else we've got." Before he could look further, Kira's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, we've found something. You might want to see this." Elias motioned for John to stay at the terminal, then moved toward the sound of Kira's voice. Lila was already there, crouched by a small hatch that led deeper into the station's bowels. The hatch was old, rusted, and sealed tight, but there was a faint buzzing sound coming from within. It didn't take long for Kira to pry open the hatch, revealing a narrow shaft that led down into the unknown. "What do you think?" Elias asked, his hand resting on his weapon. Kira looked up at him, her expression grim. "Something's down there. A presence. I don't know what, but it's definitely active." Lila's eyes narrowed. "We need to check it out." Without waiting for further confirmation, she lowered herself into the shaft, disappearing into the dark below. Elias exchanged a glance with John before following her lead, Kira and the rest of the crew close behind. The air grew heavier as they descended, the buzzing sound growing louder, more pronounced. When they reached the bottom, the dim light from their flashlights revealed a large chamber, much larger than the one above. But what caught their attention was what lay in the center of the room, a towering, cylindrical structure, bathed in an unnatural green glow. The air around it seemed to hum, a low-frequency vibration that rattled the bones. Elias stepped forward cautiously, his hand tightening around the grip of his weapon. The walls of the chamber were lined with old data consoles and machinery, but they were no longer functional. They had long since been rendered useless by the passage of time. Yet the energy core in the center pulsed with life, drawing them in with its eerie presence. "This is it," John muttered. "This is what's been drawing us here." Kira stepped closer, her hand reaching out toward the pulsating core. "What is it? Some kind of power source?" Elias wasn't so sure. "It's something else," he said, his voice low. "It feels wrong. Before anyone could respond, a low, guttural sound echoed through the chamber, causing them all to freeze. The noise grew louder, more distinct, until they could hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate. The crew turned in unison toward the entrance. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the dim light, its outline indistinct and shifting, as if made from shadows themselves. "Who's there?" Elias called, his voice steady despite the rising tension. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it stepped forward, and as it did, the air seemed to warp around it, rippling like a mirage. The creature was tall, its form human-like but distorted, its eyes glowing with an unnatural, violet light. The Void-Born. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as he took a step back, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. The creature's eyes locked onto him, its gaze piercing and cold. And then, with an unnatural, jerking motion, it spoke. "You should not have come here, Captain Drayden," it hissed, its voice echoing with a terrible, otherworldly power. "This place belongs to us. And now, you will belong to us, too." In a heartbeat, the crew raised their weapons, but the creature's presence seemed to warp the very space around them, making the air feel thick and oppressive. Elias's pulse quickened as he realized this wasn't just a physical threat, it was something far more dangerous, something that could turn their minds and bodies against them in an instant. The battle had begun. And it would not be easy. The moment the creature spoke, Elias's instincts kicked in. "Get back," he shouted, his hand jerking toward the crew. But it was already too late. The air around them seemed to shimmer, a heavy pressure enveloping the room, pushing them toward the ground. Kira gasped, her body convulsing as if something unseen was trying to twist her mind. The creature's violet eyes gleamed, and its mouth spread into a grotesque grin. "Foolish humans," it hissed. "You think you can understand the power you face? We are not just flesh and bone. We are the shadows that consume your thoughts, the terror that breaks your will." Elias gritted his teeth and fought the rising panic in his chest. He could feel it, the mental tug, the pressure on his mind, trying to take root in his thoughts, planting seeds of doubt and fear. He wasn't immune, none of them were. The Void-Born weren't just physical threats. They were predators of the mind, creatures that feasted on fear, that turned hope into despair. He tried to push through it, focusing on his breath, on the mission. The Void-Born had taken everything from him before. This time, it wasn't just his life they sought. It was the very essence of who he was. "Hold together," he growled, more to himself than anyone else. "Focus. They want us to break. Don't let them." Lila was the first to recover, her eyes steely as she fought the mental assault, pulling her weapon from its holster. With a sharp motion, she aimed at the creature, her breath steady despite the oppressive force closing in around them. "We can't let it control us," she muttered. "We fight back." John, standing beside her, slammed his hand on the nearest console, its screen flickering with power. The station's systems buzzed erratically, but in that moment, the disruption felt like a beacon, a reminder that they weren't completely helpless. The creature raised a hand, its fingers twisting in an unnatural arc, as though it could reach into their very souls and tear them apart. "You do not have the strength to fight me," it intoned, its voice like a cold wind. "Your minds are already mine." But just as Elias thought they might be trapped, a low, rumbling sound filled the air. It started at the back of the chamber, far beyond the dark core, and then it grew louder, an almost mechanical hum. A subtle vibration in the walls, like the awakening of something ancient and powerful. "What is that?" Kira asked, her voice tremulous, yet laced with hope. Elias didn't have time to answer. The creature's gaze snapped to her, its lips curling in a sneer. "You have no allies here. You will die alone." And then, from the depths of the station, something answered the creature. A voice, faint but clear, resonated through the walls, cutting through the oppressive weight of the Void-Born's influence. "You are wrong," the voice said, each word laden with authority. "They are not alone." A bright flash of light erupted from the far side of the room, and Elias's heart skipped a beat. The light was blinding, like a beacon cutting through the void, filling the chamber with an intense glow. It was not the creature's work, this was something else, something more ancient and powerful. The creature hissed, its form flickering as if struggling against the light, and for the first time, Elias saw fear in its eyes. "No. You can't stop." Before it could finish its threat, the light pulsed again, and the creature staggered backward, its body distorting as if the very fabric of its being was being torn apart. The room seemed to warp around it, the shadows stretching and twisting, fighting against the presence of the light. "What the hell is that?" John breathed, his voice a mixture of awe and fear. "Not what," Lila corrected, her eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding before them. "Who?" The light intensified, coalescing into a figure. A tall, imposing figure clad in a suit of ancient armor, its surface shimmering like the stars themselves. The being moved with the grace of a warrior, each step resonating with a power that seemed to shake the station to its core. The void-born creature writhed in the light's presence, its form losing its solidity as if it were being disintegrated by pure force. The figure spoke again, its voice deep and resonant. "Begone, shadow. You have no place here." With a final, anguished scream, the void-born entity crumpled into nothingness, its form collapsing in on itself until there was nothing left but a fading wisp of smoke. The light dimmed as the figure approached them, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. The crew stood frozen, still trying to process what had just happened. But Elias's heart raced with a new kind of fear. They had just witnessed something beyond the limits of their understanding. The figure, now fully visible, lowered its helm, revealing the face beneath, pale, almost luminous, with eyes that gleamed like twin stars. It was humanoid, but there was something distinctly not human about it. "I am Arlos," the figure intoned, its voice echoing through the chamber like a distant thunderclap. "I have watched over this station for millennia, guarding its secrets. You have trespassed in this sacred place, but you may yet prove worthy." Elias stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Who are you? What is this place?" Arlos raised a hand, and the room seemed to come alive. The ancient station's walls shimmered with faint light as holographic projections flickered into existence around them. Maps, star charts, and alien symbols filled the air. This was once the center of the Androsian Empire's research into the Voidborn, Arlos explained. "The knowledge here is ancient, older than the Voidborn themselves. It is the key to defeating them." John stepped closer to the projections, his eyes wide. "Wait. You're saying this is a research station? This place holds the answer?" Arlos nodded slowly. "It holds the knowledge of their creation, their weaknesses, and a way to end them once and for all. But only those who prove themselves worthy may access it." Elias glanced at his crew. They were all stunned, but there was a spark of something else, hope. They had come here for answers, and it seemed they had found them. "I'm not interested in proving anything," Elias said, his voice strong and steady. "I just want to save the galaxy." Arelos's gaze softened slightly. "Then you must understand the burden that comes with this knowledge. The path to victory will not be easy. The Voidborn will stop at nothing to destroy you, and they are not the only ones who seek what is here." The tension in the room grew thick again, but Elias felt something change. They weren't just hunting for survival anymore. They were hunting for victory. Arlos stepped aside, his hand sweeping toward the holographic map. "If you wish to stop them, you must follow the path that lies ahead. The true battle has only just begun." As Elias and his crew stood before the glowing map, the weight of their mission settled fully upon them. The galaxy's future depended on what they did next. And they were ready to fight. The weight of Arelos's words lingered in the air as Elias and his crew stood before the projections, the full gravity of their situation settling over them. The knowledge they sought was within their reach, but the price of uncovering it was more than just their lives, it was their very souls. "We've come this far," Elias said, his voice steady. "And we're not turning back. Whatever it takes, we'll finish this." Lila, always the pragmatist, glanced at the holographic map. This map points to several locations. But the most critical one is right here, she said, tapping the central projection. A void-born stronghold. If we can destroy it, we'll cripple their command. It's our best shot. Arlo stepped forward, his eyes glowing faintly. The stronghold is heavily guarded, and its defenses are unlike anything you faced. The Voidborn are not just creatures of the flesh, they are part of the fabric of the void itself. Their stronghold is a nexus of dark energy. To destroy it, you will need more than just weapons. John, his mind always working in overdrive, spoke up. What are we talking about here? We're not just talking about bombs, are we? No, Arlos replied, his voice cold yet understanding. You will need to harness the very power that the Voidborn seek to control, the essence of the void itself. Elias frowned. And how do we do that? Arelos's eyes dimmed for a moment, as if recalling something ancient and forgotten. There is a device hidden within the stronghold, a machine built by the Androsian Empire during their last attempt to combat the Voidborn. It was meant to channel the energy of the void and turn it against them. But the machine is incomplete, its power is volatile, and its activation could tear the very fabric of space and time. Great, Lila muttered, clearly unimpressed. A weapon that could blow up everything. What's the catch? The catch, Arlo said gravely, is that only one person can activate it. And that person must be able to withstand the power of the void without succumbing to its corruption. If the wrong person tries, they will become a vessel for the Voidborn's control. There was a long, heavy pause. Everyone exchanged uneasy glances. The magnitude of the decision was clear. To use this weapon, to stand against the Voidborn and all they represented, was not something they could do lightly. Elias took a deep breath, his mind racing. He wasn't a hero, and he wasn't willing to throw away his crew's lives for a gamble. But if there was a chance to stop the Voidborn, to end the war once and for all, he knew what had to be done. I'll do it, Elias said, his voice unwavering. I'll be the one to activate the machine. No. Kira's voice was sharp with panic. You can't. We don't know what'll happen. We can't risk you becoming one of them. I don't have a choice, Elias replied, his eyes meeting hers. We don't have a choice. If we don't stop them now, we'll all be dead anyway. There's no second chance. Lila nodded in agreement. He's right. We're not walking out of here unless we end this, once and for all. John stepped forward, looking at Elias with a mix of admiration and fear. I don't like it, but I get it. We've got one shot at this. If you're going, we're all going with you. Agreed, Kira said, though her voice was strained with worry. But we're all in this together. We're not letting you do it alone. Arlos watched the exchange in silence, and when they turned to him, he nodded solemnly. I will guide you. But know this, the moment you activate the device, there is no turning back. You will be faced with a trial. Only the purest of heart can withstand the power of the void. If you are not, you will fall. Elias didn't flinch. He was prepared. He had to be. Then let's go, he said. We've got a war to win. The journey to the Voidborn stronghold was long and fraught with danger. As the Reluctance hurtled through the dark stretches of space, the crew felt the heavy weight of their mission pressing down on them. Each passing moment seemed to stretch on forever, the silence broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the soft clatter of their preparations. When they finally arrived, the stronghold loomed before them, a massive, black monolith floating in the emptiness of space. Its surface was scarred, covered in the telltale signs of void-born influence, swirling tendrils of dark energy, twisting and undulating, like some living thing. This is it, Elias said, his voice tight. Everyone knows the plan. Lila looked at him, her expression hard. We get in, activate the device, and get out. No heroics. John, his hands busy checking the ship's systems, nodded. We'll need to be fast. The Voidborn will know we're coming the second we breach their defenses. Kira, her face pale but determined, spoke up. If the machine works, we'll need to be ready for anything. The Voidborn won't go down without a fight. Elias turned to face them, each of them ready in their own way. We've come too far to fail now. We're not just fighting for survival, we're fighting for the future of the galaxy. For everyone we've lost. For every world that's been burned. The crew nodded, their resolve hardening like steel. As the Reluctance made its final approach, Elias felt his heart beat faster. They were about to face the final trial. The future of the galaxy was in their hands, and no matter the cost, they would see it through. The ship's landing bay doors opened, and the crew filed out, weapons raised, their faces grim but resolute. The stronghold was silent, ominously so. They stepped into the blackened halls of the enemy's fortress, knowing they were walking into the heart of darkness itself. And as they made their way deeper into the stronghold, the device, dark, foreboding, and powerful, waited for its activation. Elias stepped toward it, his hand shaking only slightly as he approached the final decision. "I'll do it," he said once more, his voice steady. "This is our last chance." And with that, Elias pressed the button. The void answered.